Welcome to the Franklyn interview. I'm Audrey P. Franklyn. I'm president of the Franklyn Agency. We're in the communication and public relations business in West Hollywood. My guest tonight is Len Bergantino, PhD, who's an expert in Gestalt training. Now that's a mouthful, Len.
It sure is, Audrey. You know, I was trained by Dr. Irv and Dr. Miriam Polster of the Gestalt Training Center in San Diego.
Oh, so everybody is kind of in the training business in psychology.
No, I didn't say that, Audrey. These people were world-renowned trainers in Gestalt therapy, probably the best known, best alive today. And when I first met them, well, I met Irv at first, and you know, my dad was a musician, and ever since I was a little boy, he used to train me to listen for excellence. I used to hear records of Caruso, and I'd hear Benny Goodman. My dad was a guitar player, and he used to let me hear Charlie Christian, and so I was always looking for excellence. So I happened to be a psychologist, and I saw Irv Polster do a demonstration. And maybe you could show the Irv and Miriam's picture to the group. And as you see, he has no hair and is kind of on top, and on the side he has hair, and Miriam's well, just a lovely looking lady. But Irv kind of looked a little like Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah, they kind of look like they're in Gestalt.
And I went to, I saw him work, and he was outstanding in a demonstration. He could do things I couldn't do, so if I'm younger than him, you know, that's how you look up a trainer, somebody that can teach you something that kind of moves where you're going to go in your professional skills and abilities.
So the demonstration, Len, was mainly for professionals in psychotherapy?
All psychologists were there at the time, and a dangerous group in itself to have that many in one room. But Irv did this demonstration, and I went up and I said, hey, geez, you know, it'd be great to drop in and catch what you do on a weekend or something like that. And he says, well, you know, you could drop in for 3 years. That's what I do. And I said, 3 years? That's a long time, you know. And I kind of wrestled with that and struggled with it. And then I finally had an interview with the Polsters, and there I was in a 3-year training program.
Because Irving Polster had something that you wanted.
Yeah, he did. He did, which I'll tell you about. So then I said to him, you know, you look a little like Benjamin Franklin. And he said, well, you know, he's screwed 9 times a day. And
that's kind of funny.
It was an amazing
It's a funny remark.
It was, because, you know, Franklin was on the commission that discredited Wilhelm Reich's work when the United States, Mesmer's work, and which was a takeoff on Reich's work, and Polster actually integrated Reich's work into Gestalt therapy, and he looks like Benjamin Franklin. I mean, it just blew my mind. So I began the training program with Miriam and Irv, and Irv was definitely flashier, more artistic, visibly noticeable, but Miriam was quite talented in her own way, as I got to appreciate later. She could take small baby steps in a way that scaled things down that would make the impossible possible. But Irv, and you know, Gestalt therapy means whole or integrated, like split off parts of yourself. So let's say I grew up in Waterbury, Connecticut, and they had a hierarchy there of you know, they had Puerto Ricans in one end of town, and then blacks in another end of town, and then there were Italians who were sort of in the middle there. The Irishmen were the mayors and the superintendents of schools.
It sounds like Los Angeles now, Len.
Well, that's a whole other story, but it's not mine. So the story I'm going to tell you is, and then they had the Jewish kids were kind of on the outside of things, but they were smart, and they kind of went to the places like Yale and Harvard and some schools like that. And then the WASPs, they kind of ran things behind the scenes. but you never saw any of them. They always went to private schools from the start, and this was the hierarchy, but there was a kind of feeling like, well, it wasn't so good to be an Italian, which I never knew about. It was very subtle, except when my parents, my grandparents came over, and my parents were little kids around 1911 or 14 in there. They actually changed their names in school. Like my father's name was Donato, and they made him English sounding. He became Daniel. And my mother's was Segundina, and they made hers May.
So all this has something to do with Gestalt?
Yeah, because I'm going to try and explain what I mean by becoming whole or integrating. Like the Polster's book is Gestalt Therapy Integrated. So I give you an example of how I became integrated in one situation, or what Gestalt experiment might be. So I'm in the group, and who's a funny-looking guy in his own right.
He looks like Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin, right? Who screws a lot. And so here he says to me, he says, you know, you look like a foreigner. Are you a foreigner?
What's a foreigner, Len?
So I don't know, but he said this to me, and I says, well, I'm Italian, you know, Italian-American. He says, but you don't act like one. What the hell happened to you?
I think you act like an Italian-American.
Yeah, but this is after he trained me. You see the point? I didn't before. I was sort of homogenized, Americanized, anglicized, I don't know what you want to call it, but something happened to my own Italianism. It's like I was an Italian who wasn't an Italian. And it happened because on a very subtle racial level, it wasn't so good to be one. And this was like very covert stuff back then. Not at all dealt with in any sort of racial consciousness. So Irv says, well, you look like a foreigner, but you don't act. He says, well, do you remember anything about being an Italian? He says, well, I remember when I was a little kid, I used to go to these weddings, and they'd have these old ladies there with these black shoes, high up to their ankles, and they'd have tambourines, and they'd be dancing the tarantella. So he said, and there's a group of about 8 or 9 of us. He says, do you remember how it goes? I said, yeah. Bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba 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 bum. Dun da 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 ba bum ba da 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 ba bum. So I sing it a little, and some of the feeling starts to come back from like 30 years before. Integrated, Gestalt therapy integrated, becoming whole.
Did it make you feel better? Is that why you wanted that?
The feeling of being whole, of being my heritage, my roots. Look what Alex Haley did to get his roots, right? Began to come back again. So
it gave you identity.
Audrey, I'm telling you what it did. Just there. Don't get me on another
I can't
track.
wait to hear what it did, Len.
I know. I got to slow you down. So there I am, and he says, well, do you remember how to dance it? And I think about it. I says, I probably could do it. And so I got up and I started to dance it and started to move that way. And pretty soon, 8 or 9 people in the group, the whole group, are dancing the tarantella. And from there, what happens, I hadn't played the mandolin in 10, 15 years. I began to play the mandolin and the old Italian numbers again. Now, there were actually times Irv could track one step follows another of experience, little pieces of experience, until they became accentuated, where I would go in there sick. I'd have a fever, and at the end of the work, the fever would be gone. I'd be in such good contact with myself. And I suppose why I've come around after doing most everything in 20 years to training in Gestalt therapy is I think it's a healthy way to live, because basically what we're looking at is the contact level between 2 human beings. When a person's in contact or out of contact, what kind of contact? Is it the kind of song you want to hear? Is it full? Is it nourishing? Is it emotionally enlivening? Or is it the kind that's deadening, stultifying, kills the life force in people? And Gestalt, with the focus on experiment, leaves the therapist enough freedom to be able to move whichever way he needs to create the experiment that moves toward enlivenment. And I see it as a healthy way to live, as a healthy way to raise your family, as a healthy way to be in the world, which, as psychotherapy goes, is probably the most least controlled as a body of psychotherapy by what I'd refer to as the culture bind.
It sounds, Len, like it would be living in a very simple way in a very complex world, because our world with communication today and with all the people is becoming more complex.
Well, Gestalt therapy, though, is simple and is natural, but the complexity of how to relate in a contactful, refreshing way is very complicated. As simple as it is, it took 3 years to begin to learn it and do it pretty well.
It sounds like, Dr. Bergantino, that it brought out a certain humility in you.
You're
know?
taking me by surprise. How do you see that?
Well, because you'd have to kind of get off your high horse, you know, and you'd have to just get down to your whole essence.
Well, I don't know what makes you think
now
I
I'm
have
becoming the
a
psychologist.
high horse, but...
Well, an attitude, you know,
think I
of
have an
being
attitude?
world-renowned and being so well-trained by so many experts in your
You think
field.
I have an attitude problem?
You might have had. You don't have it now.
I don't have it this hour.
No, I think that the pollsters were very helpful.
So that's the point. You see, if they were very helpful in teaching me this, and I'm one of the few people that they've, well, I shouldn't say that, but certainly in Los Angeles, as far as I know, I'm one of the few people that's a 3-year graduate of the pollsters, and I live and teach and train people in West LA, that this kind of work, as I see it, is important for therapists no matter what modality they practice, because it enlivens and refreshes in what I see is a time and era that's legally stultifying to the professional community. Anything creatively that was going to happen, it did happen between the 50s and about the beginning of the 80s. After that, things began to tighten up in a way where medicine, psychology, psychotherapy is very defensive these days.
It's almost, there's a certain...
It's not practiced in the going for the most creative edge in the way that it'll bring the most to the patients. It's practiced to stay out of lawsuits. So
you can just feel the competition. I mean, even with the election we just had, it almost was dog eat dog.
Different story for a different time. But I see the Gestalt training as important in a few areas. One is that psychotherapists or analysts or whatever method of therapy they practice, it will free them up enough to do a better job in whatever area they do practice. If they want to practice Gestalt therapy, that's an art one develops in itself. And the third thing is in the legal system, particularly in the family law area, we have a lot of lawyers and mediators who want to be able to utilize their therapeutic use of self enough to make an impact in a positive way with people who are suffering greatly as a result of being involved in the family law system. So those are the ways and then I train people at the international level in Gestalt therapy. I trained in Australia, in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Newcastle. I was there in 84, 86, 88. And my book is Psychotherapy, Insight, and Style, The Existential Moment.
And you just you have another book coming out in Germany.
Well, this book is being published in German and will be out at the Frankfurt Book Fair in September 1992. It's being published by Humanistische Psychologie. That's as close
And
as
is
I can get
it regarding Gestalt therapy?
There's a significant section of the book that deals with Irv and Marion Polster in there, my training with Jim Simpkin, with Walter Kempler in couples and family work, Milton Erickson, Carl Whitaker. It's
all the giants in psychology.
Yeah.
So the Polsters, are they helping to promote the Gestalt method?
Yeah, they're international trainers. They train all over the world and have an excellent reputation, and they're just top of the mark.
But you really feel, Dr. Bergantino, that more psychologists should be aware of Gestalt rather than just slipping over it.
Here's the thing. Everybody's aware of it, right? But you had Fritz Perls, who was the guy who really founded the methodology of practice in it, was a powerful, impactful figure.
And what year was this, Dr. Bergantino?
Like the 50s, 40s.
Oh, so it's kind of a new method.
Well, he died in 1970, and then Simpkin was another powerhouse. But during an era with the politics of psychotherapy as it's been, Polsters are two of the few giants left who train people internationally. So while people have heard of it, they've never really seen people do it effectively or what it does. So it's kind of a lost art, you know. I suppose maybe if I were going to write another book, I'd call it The Last Guru. It's almost like the world doesn't want any anymore. They're not ready for them. It's everybody's homogenized into a sense of therapeutic mediocrity.
Could you give us some kind of example how it would work, let's say in couples therapy? How the Gestalt method that you practice would work?
I like to do couples therapy with it because it gives a chance for each person's humanity to begin to unfold one step at a time. In other words, if you accentuate the experience, you get a chance to become all that you can in my presence, if I'm your husband, in me, or your boyfriend, and all that I can in your presence, where if things come in and they're kind of tight between us, or...
Like two boxers.
Two boxers, right. We begin to embellish or flourish emotionally, where we have a chance to break through our limited, learned limitations in a way that gives us a chance to dance in a more emotionally satisfied, enjoyable way.
Well, I think it sounds to me that we're coming back to the word humility or humble.
How do you see that?
Because I think rather than coming in to the situation like two boxers, you're coming into the situation more like a diplomat. A diplomat.
I don't understand how you see it that way, but maybe you can tell me.
Well, with a little more style and a little more savoir-faire, rather than, you know, like mad. A little humility. Because I thought the story that you said earlier, you know, about your coming to your roots of being Italian, which helped you with Gestalt, and also, you know, the couples therapy, there has to be some kind of humbleness to approach psychology.
So then, I guess what you're saying is, from what I've said to you, you think this humility that you pick up is my strength.
I think it's very hard, don't you think so, in our times to learn humility? Well, when most of us have such egos and are so arrogant.
That's interesting. I mean, it's interesting you see me that way.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
So, so Gestalt which is spelled Gestalt, and it's a German word.
German word.
Yeah, and it means whole.
Right.
Is really what the 90s need insofar as the approach or the method of a treatment in psychology.
I think so, and the reason I think so is in the 50s and 60s, everybody was experimenting and creating things that were new. And then everything became tighter, became frozen, became rigid, and the training, teaching, regimented in a way that I think the profession is quite stultified. But I think as a body of theoretical knowledge that can be implemented in the training of psychotherapists, it's the only chance to loosen that tightness up among the entire therapeutic community. I mean, there's certainly individuals who could do it, like Carl Whitaker, but he's just one man. But I think as a group, Gestalt has the best chance to do that job. That's why I train in it, and that's why I identify with it.
But it's still interesting that more psychologists are not picking up it more than they have. In other words, there's not that many trainers in the world in Gestalt.
Who do it well enough to make that big an impact, right.
Do you think that your book will be released here in the United States?
It has been. It was published in '81 by Allen and Bacon, republished in '86 by Jason Aronson, who still sells the book.
Oh,
and it's,
that's the book that is in Germany now?
Yes, and it was Book of the Month twice for Psychotherapy and Social Science Review. And I think what the world needs is more impactful Gestalt trainers, and the more the better, because it's the best chance to enliven the entire profession.
Are there more people in general, Dr. Bergantino, who are interested and will go to a psychologist in the 90s? Is it becoming more popular?
Well, everybody goes to a psychologist, but then again, that's a West Los Angeles viewpoint, or a psychiatrist. I suppose the question is, will anything happen if they go? Or what might happen? Will it make a difference? Will it make an impact? Will it have an effect?
Will it change their lives?
Yeah, does it have a chance of doing that? And if so, in what way?
I see. So there is hope for our society as you see it today.
I think so. But it's a tough struggle. You got to remember, it wasn't so long ago, 1956, that the United States government burnt the books of Wilhelm Reich. Bruno Bettelheim, world-famous psychoanalyst who knew Freud personally, was trained in that genre, said to me Reich was Freud's most gifted training analyst. The United States government burnt his books in a bonfire.
Was it because they were afraid of Reich, do you think, Dr. Bergantino?
Well, Reich said that whenever people talk about the life force or energy moving through a person's body, right, that makes people nervous, and they want to go back to the tight reins. The life force makes people nervous, and Reich's focus was there, Mesmer's focus was there, and Benjamin Franklin really didn't agree with the commission back in Mesmer's day. He was a dissenting opinion, and here he comes back looking like Polster.
Oh, that's interesting. So actually, it seems like Gestalt follows in this same pattern.
Well, it certainly has its political overtones of fighting the oppressive force in people in itself, with the person in itself. It frees them up, where that the freer the people become, I suppose the more politically mobile or activists they might turn out to be. But you know, I think if we look at the riot in Los Angeles, it was a reaction to a kind of, well, again, it's an extreme use of the word, but movement toward a fascist society.
I think,
I think the people find a certain degree of oppression that they fight against. And
is it really there, though?
oh, you bet it's there, from top to bottom. The problem is burning your own buildings doesn't really solve the problem, other than showing other people in the country that the problem exists, and there's a lot of people who are sick of it. I mean, that's why Ross Perot's getting such a strong viewing, regardless of what anybody knows about him.
But he's no Abe Lincoln, let's face it. He didn't come from a log cabin, or he didn't end up like Abe did.
See, it's a protest vote. You know, the Republicans, the Democrats, all seem to be in the same soup. And Perot, he's kind of the first outsider since Teddy Roosevelt that's putting both feet in the middle of that soup.
Well, I don't know what to say about politics because, you know, at this point, I really don't know who I'm going to vote for, you know, in the coming election. But I'm going to give it a lot of thought before I put my there. Dr. Len Bergantino, expert in Gestalt training in West Los Angeles, I want to thank you so much for coming on this segment of the Franklyn interview. I tried to understand as much as I could. I hope I didn't blow you away with some of my commentary this evening.
No, Audrey, I appreciated you got, how should I say, more at ease with yourself and your familiarity with what I was saying, and felt quite comfortable, except for the couple of moments you put me on the hot seat. It's things I wasn't aware of, but I was appreciative you did that.
Well, Gestalt, the whole of being.
I guess the title of this show is Gestalt Humility.
Gestalt Humility. Thank you so much, Dr. Len Bergantino. You've been watching the Franklyn interview. Our topic tonight, Gestalt Humility. I'm Audrey P. Franklyn. We'll see you next time here on Public Access. Good evening.